My brothers and sisters, it seems really simple and uncomplicated. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. But many people don't fully get it. A woman came to have a talk with her pastor. Obviously, she was deeply disturbed. I do not love God, she confessed. I've tried as earnestly as I know how, but I have not succeeded. I have come to the conclusion that I cannot love God. Others may, but for me, it's impossible. What should I do? Her confession was the start of a discussion between her and her pastor. They spoke for some length about what it means to love God. In her mind, it meant only one thing, or primarily one thing, and that is to have a warm, affectionate feeling toward the Almighty. She did not have that and had never been able to generate it. That was the cause for her concern. And she was greatly relieved when her pastor admitted that he himself seldom, if ever, had such a feeling for God. I think that's true for many people. Rarely do we have the kind of emotional feeling for God that we would have, say, for our child or our wife. You might on some days, when you think perhaps the day of your first communion or confirmation, or the day of your wedding, or the day when your first child was born, you might have that kind of feeling. But I suspect that for many of us, those moments where love is experienced as an emotional feeling kind of thing, I think it's, for God that is, I think kind of rare. Should that bother us? Does that mean that we are in violation of the greatest commandment of all? No, not at all. When the Bible commands us to love God, it has nothing to do with feelings. What it has to do with is obedience. That is the basis for our relationship with God, not how we feel, but what we do. And Jesus makes this quite clear in many places in the Scriptures. For instance, in the Sermon on the Mount, he puts the emphasis not on how you feel at all, but on what you do. He says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the person who does the will of my Father in heaven." And in the fourth gospel, he says, "If you love me, keep my commandments," and so forth. And the same is true when you look at the second great commandment, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." It has nothing to do with how you feel toward your neighbor, nothing at all. You might remember, back in the late 60s, there was a popular book called The Exorcist, made into a movie. In fact, I think it was remade. And I don't think this passage that I'm talking about here was in the movie, but it's definitely in the book. And it was served as an eye-opener to me as I was a young priest ordained maybe 2-3 years at that time. They're two Jesuit priests. They are the exorcists. And they're having conversation. One of them is young and the other is old. And they're talking about love. And here's what the older priest says to his younger colleague. "Long ago," he confessed, "I despaired of ever loving my neighbor. Certain people repelled me. How could I love them? And that tormented me. It led me to despair of myself, and from that very soon to despair of my God. My faith was shattered. At last I realized that God would never ask of me that which I know to be psychologically impossible. The love he was asking was in my will, and was not meant to be felt as emotion at all. He was asking that I act with love, that I do unto others, and that I act with love toward those who repelled me, I believe, was a greater act of love than any other." I I know all of this must seem very obvious, but at the time I could not see it. Strange blindness. And then he adds this: how many husbands and wives must believe that they have fallen out of love because their hearts no longer race at the sight of their beloved? And he shook his head sadly. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. He's asking that we act with love, that we do unto others the way we treat ourselves. St. Thomas Aquinas kind of explains that. He says, the love that we have for ourselves is the model for the love we give to others. I am to love others the way I love myself. So, for example, a person might say, I'm not always fond of myself. I'm not always proud of what I've done. There are times when I don't even like myself. But regardless of how I feel about me, I always care about me. And I owe you the same consideration. When I do something wrong, I want to be forgiven. If I want that for myself, I must give it to you too. Though I am different, I want to be accepted. If I want that for myself, I must give it to you too. When I am in need, I want someone to help me. If I want that for myself, I must give it to you too. In short, what I want for myself, I must also give to you. That is what it means to love my neighbor as myself. Fortunately, Jesus gives us more than just these two commandments. He gives us the power, the strength, the ability to be able to practice them. In this Eucharist, he nourishes us with his body and blood, which is to say, he gives us himself. He gives us his ability to forgive, to care, to heal. We pray, make us grow in love, and we receive the living Christ to make that happen.